Hi, we have a world where we have super complex issues to deal with that are actually complex and they're real. They're going to require complexity thinking, nuanced conversations with diverse folk. And we need to be able to understand how to approach these different issues. And when it comes to approaching these different issues, there's a lot of different approaches we can take. And polarity thinking, I find to be a really helpful tool for understanding how to think about these different polarities of approaches. And now, polarity thinking, obviously, we have polarization, but polarity thinking is a little bit different than that. When we're considering the big decisions, these wicked problems, it seems like we have a choice we have to face. Do we deal with it this way or do we deal with it that way? Do we take this approach or do we take that approach? Now, those questions exist. There actually are polarizing approaches that are important to consider as we're thinking about which way to approach different things. But there's different kinds of polarities, and we're getting confused about it. So there's polarities that are problems that we need to solve. And then there are polarities that we need to figure out how to manage the tension between the two sides. Now, problems to solve. This is an either or choice that we just get to make. So how do we know if it's a problem we need to solve? One is that we make the choice once and then it's there. So do I eat this meal or do I eat that meal? That's not anything we need to manage. Maybe we get to we can think about the different approaches we take to that question. When we hire this person, hire that person, vote for that person, vote for this person. So those choices are real. And we also consider them independently from each other. We can look at the fried chicken and we can look at the lasagna, and we can really weigh the lasagna in its own right or weigh the fried chicken in its own right. We don't have to understand what lasagna is to eat a fried chicken or vice versa. Now, the other kind of polarities is called an interdependent polarity. And this is where both and thinking comes into play. And one of the mistakes that we make is that we try to make choices about it. See, a polarity that's interdependent means that they look like they're opposites, but they actually give each other meaning. So each one is giving meaning to the other. And we actually can't have one without the other. Like one of the most basic, simple polarities is the old way of doing something or the new way of doing something. If we talk about the old way, there's not, it immediately gives rise to the question of the new way. Another super basic polarity is inhale and exhale. We can't really understand inhale and exhale without one or the other, and we can't actually make a choice. So when we try to make a choice, this is where we get ourselves into polarization or chronic conflict. When you have an interdependent polarity, choosing one side or the other is going to make it a destructive, degenerative situation. So if I'm trying to inhale and I decide that exhaling is bad, I'm going to eventually pass out, probably. We're not going to try it right now. But, you know, if we just try to do things only the old way, we actually it can get real messy pretty quickly. If we're just trying to do things the new way and just try to forget anything that we learned from the past, we're going to get into trouble that way as well. But this becomes a chronic conflict when they get framed as a choice, because if they're constantly co-creating each other, then every time someone says, let's do it this way, then someone's going to say, yes, but what about this other way? Now, so they become destructive if we make the choice. But what's really cool about interdependent polarity is that if we can get both of them working together, then it becomes generative and beneficial, and very positive things can happen. So I get to, do my breathing, staying alive, getting enlightened in my meditation or something. Or if I'm keeping track of the things I've learned from the past and keeping track of the things that I've learned in the future and constantly changing. Then I get to build off of the past as I create new things. So that becomes a beneficial generative process. Now, another thing that's interesting about interdependent polarities is that the positive qualities of one polarity actually solve the problem of the negative qualities of the other one. But this also leads to the dynamic, the fact that they have positive and negative qualities, each one. We get ourselves into this situation where usually people, when they're in a polarized space, are looking from the positive side of their side and they're looking at the negative qualities of the other side. And they're not willing to admit to the shadow side of their own perspective. And definitely not willing to admit the positive qualities of the other side. I'm just going to give a couple examples of this, and then I'm going to show you a tool that we can use to sort of understand interdependent polarities and actually learn how to manage them in a way that's, I think, pretty amazing. In fact, for me, once I understood interdependent polarities, I see them everywhere, and it's become just like very powerful default way of thinking for me. So some examples of classic interdependent polarities. One of them is centralized or decentralized. Do we spread control out to the group, or do we try to center it into the center? Like on one hand, people will be more engaged, but we lose kind of control and everything spreads out, or we centralize it and everyone feels like they're being under the boot of the authority and happening just the way we want it. Another way of organizing that comes up is collaboration more useful, or is independence more useful? So, do we focus on collaboration or independence? Do we focus on the whole, or do we focus on the parts? Do we try to figure out what's best for the organization, or do we try to figure out what's best for each individual? There's different ways of kind of processes that we could think about with interdependent polarities. Some examples are, do we prepare? Do we learn? Or do we act? Are we trying to figure out how to prepare for what we're going to do? Or do we just go out there and do it? Or do we try to focus on really focusing on the long-term decisions, long-term sustainable decisions? Or do we deal with what's right in front of us right now? So those, again, I'm saying or, but they're really and. We actually have to pay attention to the short term and the long term. Some other kinds of interdependent polarities might be about how we relate to others or the world around us. So we can either have grievance is one approach, and we have gratitude. Say, I don't like the way it happened, or we can say I'm really grateful for the way it happened. When we see someone making a huge mistake in this world, we can act with justice, and we also have the option of acting with mercy. We can forgive, or we can exact punishment, and or we can talk with candor, and we can talk with diplomacy and try to make it really easy for me to hear what you want. I can make it easy for you to hear what I want to say, or I can just say it exactly the way I want it, and I don't really care how it lands on you. These are the kind of choices that we're making, and I think it's worth understanding that in any given moment, we actually do need to choose one or the other. Do I do it this way or do it that way? The problem happens when we're doing one at the exclusion of the other one. And that's where things can get wild. So actually, I'm going to share you a tool that can help us understand and talk about interdependent polarities. This tool comes from Barry Johnson. He's wrote a book called Polarity Management, I think in the 90s. He has other organizations now called Polarity Partnerships. And this polarity map is a super basic, simple polarity map that I've made for you here. So we have option 1 and we have option 2. Now, a polarity map is a wonderful thing to do with a diverse group of people. And so the first thing that we're going to ask in this diverse group of people is, okay, what do we want? So figure out what we want. What is the goal that these two options are talking about? and also what we don't want. So we'll figure that out. What is the option one? What is option two? What do we want? What do we don't want? Or what do we not want? If you can figure out what those are in a way that everyone in a diverse group that's advocating for either side can agree on it, I like to say you're halfway there. If you know what the question is you're trying to answer, you're doing a really good job, especially if you can frame these two options as ones that everyone can appreciate and get behind the language. First thing we can do as a group is talk about the benefits of both options. And this can be really powerful as a group for people to see, okay, yeah, that is one of the benefits. Oh, I can see how that could be a good idea. And then we talk about the unintended consequences. Now, these are the unintended consequences. We could think about this as the shadow side or the negative aspect, but these unintended consequences arise from over focusing on one option at the expense of the other option. On the basic old way and new way of thinking, we can see benefits of the old ways. They're reliable. We know that it's working. It's happened before. Everyone knows how to do it. But the unintended consequences of doing things the old way, as we stagnate, we become irrelevant, things don't really happen anymore, it gets really boring, the energy just drains out of the system. Benefits of the new way is that it's dynamic, exciting, opens to change, it's keeping us on the cutting edge, goes with just the nature of evolution and change in the world. But the unintended consequences of trying things the new way and maybe forgetting about the old ways, we got all sorts of risks in that new way. In fact, a lot of interdependent polarities or polarizing questions come down to this one. In a certain way, you can almost think about the left-right divide as preserving what's right and what's working, or fixing what's wrong and trying to sort of come up with new often, though, when we're looking at something, we're looking at the focusing on just two at a time. So we'll be focusing on here's the unintended consequences that I don't like, and here is my proposal for option two. But then that's problem is if we just go do option two all day long, then eventually we're going to get into that over focus on option two is going to make lead into the unintended consequences. But usually the unintended consequences can be solved by going back to the other side and embracing the positive effects of the other one. And of course, this circles around and we get ourselves this clever, beautiful infinity symbol here. So just, I said this earlier, but the feature of this that I find to be really special is that the benefits of one side usually solve the problems of the other side. So if we're stagnating because we're too much doing things the old way, stagnation is fixed by trying a new way, which creates things being dynamic. But if it's too risky and unknown to go into the new way of doing things, well, we can fix that by remembering what do we know that works? How can we stick to our roots? And again, the cycle goes on. So this is a polarity map, and you can actually get a group of people that are stuck in some chronic polarity and actually have them fill this out together. Again, this is a very simple one, but this is basically the exercise. And once you have the map and everyone's looking at it and sees how these pieces are working together, you then can step into the work of what's called polarity management. Now, with polarity management, we get to bring in a new trick, and that is asking the group to say, what are the warning signs that we're falling into the unintended consequences of either of these sides? And again, it's another brainstorming exercise. You can get people with post-it notes, sticking them up there. For example, warning sign and sort of old way, new way is like a bunch of people started quitting. Actually, it was like, okay, people are disgruntled. The people who've been around for a long time start leaving. Then maybe you're doing things too much in the new way, or everyone just ages out. And then maybe you're doing two things too much the old way. Another thing that we then can map are what are the action steps. So if we get to the warning sign, what are the things that we can do that can lift up the benefits of either option one or option two? And this can be really powerful. And what's really cool is once you've taken this problem and you've turned it into this object, you've seen it as this kind of interactive, dynamic system, you can actually use this. You can assign people the roles. People can be like, I'm going to be the person who's going to be looking out for that warning sign. There's always going to be someone who wants to do that. And everyone can agree on, and if that happens, we're going to do X, Y, or Z. So by taking the problem and objectifying our approach to it, by turning it into an object that everyone gets to look at, we then become a team that's now in charge of making sure that we don't fall much into this problem. And so to land the plane here a little bit, both complexity theory and polarity thinking, again, I find them to be really powerful tools to help us understand how to navigate the wicked problems that we're facing in this world. And they have these different kind of cool qualities. Both of them have us step out of like that individual, either simple solutions or just one-sided solutions or polarizing approaches, and it makes us realize that we're part of something that's bigger. So it's not just this or this, but it's actually the whole system. It's the question, it's the what do we want, and we all agree that we want, even though we have two different approaches of getting there. Or with the complex systems, it helps us understand that, wow, this is like a whole bunch of moving parts, and all the moving parts here are what make this a real thing, which then helps us remember the interdependence of all those different parts. It helps us not just have that holistic perspective, but start focusing on the value of all the different pieces. But really what's important is the quality of the relationships. And if something's not working in a system, oftentimes the quality of the relationships or the nature of the process is one of the things that we really need to think about. And it also helps us recognize that we need diverse perspectives. If we had an organization or a system that only wanted to take one side of the polarity, or that was too homogenous, we no longer have a dynamic adaptive system. We actually have something that's going to ossify or fall apart or become destructive or degenerative in one way or another. And so that both of these also remind us that we need to stay in the dynamic process. We can't just have fixed solutions. We need to keep on adapting. And that also reminds us that resistance is probably not the best way of dealing with something. If you don't like something, there's a way that we need to respond to it in an adaptive way. Because trying to deny the nature of the fact that this is way super complex, or trying to stop that from happening or to try to control it, can become a serious problem. And one of the upshots here is first to come up with simple operating principles. So instead of trying to predict all the different things that might happen or try to figure it out, we can say, when this kind of thing happens, we're going to do this. And we can agree on that kind of thing. If you have a whole system and everyone is more or less agreeing that we're going to try to be as inclusive or sustainable as possible, or we're going to respond in this way to this kind of issue, those kinds of things allow in a system to be adapting to things without needing to be in control or anyone trying to regulate any like specific piece of it. One thing I think that's also helpful about these two approaches, they just remind us that the world is unpredictable, but it's predictably unpredictable. Like, we know that we don't know, and that's pretty powerful thing. We And some ways that we can respond to this is we can use experimentation, we can prototype, we can keep on making adjustments. We don't know how to solve the wicked problems. Well, okay, let's try that here and let's try that here, and we can compare them to each other. Or let's not go all in on something. Let's actually just try a little different approach to it. We also can get better at risk management. If we know that we don't know what's going to happen, we can try to make sure that we've shored up our different things, that we're prepared for all the different opportunities, that we haven't totally put all our eggs in one basket. And we also can remind ourselves that just because something worked before or it's been working for a while doesn't mean it's always going to work. In fact, if we keep on doing something the same way, we pretty much know that that's definitely not going to work. And it's also important for us to kind of like be aware of the context and the conditions. If we're looking at something we can't quite figure out what is going on here, because I'm looking at this issue and I'm looking at it super closely and I can't figure it out, probably we just need to expand the lens of our understanding. Maybe there's some voices that are included in this conversation. Maybe there's other things that are happening that we haven't considered. Knowing where you are and what's going on around you is a really great way to sort of get yourself out of polarization, when especially when dealing with like super complex different kinds of issues. We need to accept the unpredictability. And something that I'm going to be talking about a bit in the future is, what does it mean as an individual to develop my capacity to live in ambiguity and to be in a world where I actually don't really know what's going to happen. That's scary. It's inherently scary, but actually there's ways we can deal with that. So that's coming up in the future, just as a little preview there. But what's going to be coming up next is I'm going to talk to you a bit about a bunch of really cool tools and applications of polarity thinking and complexity theory that we can apply to our system. And stay tuned. Thank you for watching this video about polarity thinking and how it can help us get out of polarization. And coming soon, talk about different applications and how we can make this happen. Thank you for watching this video and hope you have a wonderful day.